This is Jay Carpenter, moderator of the Phone Word Forum, and today is Wednesday, September the 26th, 2012. It's almost 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and today's Phone Word Forum, we will have a guest, Mr. Richard Shocky, who is a member of the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council at the Federal Communications Commission. Rich is also the chairman of the SIP Forum and one of the co-founders of the ENUM initiative and an active participant in the Internet Engineering Task Force. So today we will be talking about the transition from the TDM, time division multiplexed public switch telephone network, or PSTN, to an all-IP network and some of the recent events that have occurred. This is actually Rich's second guest participation on the Phone Word Forum. The first one happened about 7-8 months ago, and we had a conversation prior to some significant developments in this initiative to transition from the PSTN to the all-IP network. And if you're interested in seeing that, you can Google Richard Shocky Phone Word, and we actually put the conversation on YouTube. So I'm going to be quiet for a bit and let some folks join and announce themselves if they would like. Rebecca Beaton from the Washington State Public Utilities Commission has joined us before we started recording. And somebody else just joined. Would you like to announce yourself?
Good afternoon. This is Cindy Carpenter.
I know you.
I know. Hi.
Thanks for joining. Rebecca, are you calling from Washington State?
Yes, I am. I am in an office in my building.
Great.
But I can hear some background. It sounds like somebody's in the airport.
Yeah, that's the environment I'm in. Thanks for bringing that up. I will try to mute my line. Hello?
Rich Shocky.
Hey, Rich. Welcome. We have Rebecca Beaton from the Washington State Public Utility Commission on the line, and a woman named Cindy Carpenter, who I happen to be married to. So.
Okay. Well, I'll just mute, and you tell me when you're ready.
Okay. Hello, a couple people just joined. Would you like to announce yourselves?
Good afternoon. It's Warren Bent.
Hello, Warren. Welcome.
Hi, Jay. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Hi, Jay. It's Mary Redka.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
Good, thanks.
A couple other people joined. Would you like to announce yourselves?
Tom.
Hello, Tom. Welcome.
How are you, Jay?
I'm well. Anybody else like to announce yourself? And by the way, on the Phone Word Forums, you're free to just participate without announcing yourself. We welcome anonymous participation as well as announced participation. And while we're waiting for a few more folks to join, the Phone Word Forums are on the last Wednesday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern, same dial-in number. And next month, October 31st, we will have Mr. Tom Fitzgerald, who is the President and CEO of the SMS 800 Inc., which is the entity that governs the toll-free resources for North America. And I'm going to mute because I know I'm in a very noisy environment here. I'm working out of a collaborative workspace in Chandler, Arizona called Gangplank. So, hello, who just joined?
Hey, Jay. It's John Evansy, 800 response.
Hi, John. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, and I'd like to acknowledge that today is Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. So appreciate everybody who's joining. Hello, who just joined?
Robert Schaefer.
Hello, Robert. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Bob Schaefer, how you doing, brother?
Hi, Rich.
How those Sooners doing?
Not good.
Well, it couldn't be bad as the NFL, you know.
Boy, wasn't that something?
Oh, God.
So that's probably a pretty good segue into an introduction. You can, for those of you that might not know, some of us have been working on various committees for a number of years, certainly Rich being one of them, and Robert and I, and actually John Evansy and Rebecca Beaton. But we've been working on, probably 10 years or more on telephone numbering and telephone numbering related issues, communications, media delivery issues, and I would just like to acknowledge Rich because, you know, your passion for this area is amazing to me, Rich. You've put in a lot of time, both I'm sure paid as well as unpaid time, in these areas, and, you know, telephone numbering is kind of, when I talk to telephone numbering, talk to people about telephone numbering, a lot of them just kind of go, okay, so what? And they go, so what? Because it's such an ingrained part of our, you know, daily lives and existences in business as well as personal existence and so forth. It's just something we sort of take for granted. But, you know, Rich, you have one of the best appreciations that I'm aware of just how critical telephone numbering and addressing is in making the entire communications and media delivery network work. And so I'm delighted to have you again as a guest. Rich was on the Phone Word Forum about 7 months ago, and we had a very good conversation, in my view, about, you know, the potential of a transition from a PSTN network, time division multiplexed, into an all IP network. And, you know, I would encourage you to listen to that. I listened to it again. And somebody just joined. Would you like to announce yourself?
Hello, this is Bill Revelle.
Hello, Bill. Welcome. So I would encourage you to listen to that again. And I would also ask that, you know, the notion of the PSTN or the time division multiplex network being retired is something that still seems rather unlikely to a lot of people. And, you know, there's a whole host of issues to be worked through in terms of making that actually become reality. And, you know, today's call partly was prompted by a letter that AT&T sent to the FCC basically requesting a date certain, let's say, release of obligations surrounding incumbent carriers' obligations for maintaining the PSTN. And that's a way of saying, you know, pretty much a way to let it sort of die. And, you know, I'm not sure it would actually be turned off at that point, but basically it wouldn't be supported the way I read it. So,
well, I'd actually say it's a transition.
Yeah, okay, so it's a transition.
It's a tactical transition.
So
we're not taking away Grandma's phone. We know.
Right, we're not taking away Grandma's phone, and there's ways to give Grandma something that, for all intents and purposes, seems like what she's got today. So
she won't notice the difference.
She won't notice the difference, exactly. So I'm going to ask that this call, since we covered, well over an hour in the prior session about, could this happen, might it happen, and so forth. And since that time, we've had, numerous meetings at the FCC, among the Technological Advisory Council, certainly CISRIC, certainly other bodies, and now AT&T has, produced this letter, this request. I'm going to ask that we all just kind of pretend that this is going to happen. And Rich, you can talk about when it might happen based upon your conversations. But I'd really request that we focus on assuming this happens and assuming it happens within some sort of time period of maybe 8 years, 10 years. What does the landscape really look like at that point? And I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna open it up to everybody that's on this call right now and ask: is there anything else that's pressing, that's on your minds, that you'd like to cover in this? And the other thing too is we're going to talk a little. This is going to be a little slanted towards toll-free telephone numbering because, toll-free telephone numbering depends upon the PSTN to work and the TDM network to work. And if the PSTN and the TDM went away today, toll-free telephone numbers would stop working. And the reason is, and all you've got to do to convince yourself of that is to try to send a text message to a toll-free telephone number, and it would not work. So, someone just joined. Would you like to announce yourself? Okay.
Jay, this is Robert.
Hi, Robert.
Just if you could clarify one thing, you used the word landscape. That could be interpreted different ways. A couple of the ways it could be interpreted as competitive or business landscape, and the other way is technical. How is this going to actually happen? And I think you probably meant the former, didn't you? Or do you want to have a discussion about technically how it would be implemented?
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not really that interested in the technical side of it, but I think the two. Well, first of all, thanks for bringing that up, because they are two somewhat different topics, but the two topics sort of dance together.
They're inseparable, Jack. They're utterly inseparable.
They're inseparable, and one of the things that always comes up is when I say, well, AT&T and Verizon are requesting a, release of obligations to operate the PSTN, people just are astounded at that. And because they think that AT&T and Verizon are making this ton of money off of, the legacy network. And so the business and the technical landscapes, if you will, and the policy landscapes all kind of dance together. So let me briefly pause there and just ask anybody that's on the call today if there's some particular aspect you would like to have addressed, and then I'll turn it over to Rich.
So this is Warren. One thing, Rich, that just given that introduction, that I think you ought to start with is just, what is meant when people are talking about the PSTN and turning it off, because I think that some people imagine that means that there's not going to be, a ubiquitous availability of an interconnected communication system. And so, okay, all right, that's fine.
This is, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, because this is, well, like for those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Shocky, and I'm a private telecommunications consultant here in Washington, D.C. I'm also chairman of the board of directors of the SIP Forum, and, of course, when you hear voice over IP, both interconnected VoIP among service providers as well as in the enterprise, you're dealing with the session initiation, the SIP, which is the session initiation protocol, which is the tactical basis by what all of this is being discussed. I'm also a member of the Federal Communications CISRIC Committee, and spend a reasonable amount of time, down there But Warren, what you point out is actually part of the core problem, which is when you say the end of the PSTN, people think you're going to take away grandma's phone. This is not. This is sort of, partially what's involved here. But the PSTN is a social construct, a social contract, if you want to put it there, that says, if you have a phone number, you will be interconnected to anybody else who has a phone number, and there is a lot of federal regulation and international regulation about how that works. That is not going away. But the tactical underpinnings on which the existing PSTN works, which is really time division multiplexing in the SS7 network, that will have to go away for very, very good reasons, and the reasons for that is it's crumbling. It really is. The existing Class 4 tandems are end of life, can't buy parts, software is not available to upgrade them, and really even among the core Class 5, the DMS 500s and 400s, DMS 500s and 5E-SSs, there's some serious concern about network outage at this particular point, when the only place you can get line cards for those systems is really eBay these days. So the fact that the POTS, plain old telephone service using time division multiplexing, has to transition is almost a given at this point, and is in fact a public safety concern at some particular point. So that's where there's several drivers here. I'm going to assume that most of you read sort of my filing with the FCC that sort of outlines what we're talking about here, and that if you believe that the FCC is trying to provide broadband to all Americans and wants to drive this thing forward, the transition of the network to an all-IP, managed all-IP infrastructure is in fact a given. And in fact, AT&T's filing essentially says that, which is part of the problem is political. Certainly AT&T is running around every state and trying to get legislation that eliminates their COLR, their carrier of last resort obligations and things like that. That's the political, social side of this. But in fact, there really is a very, very large technical issue involved, which is, to create the promise of better communications and actually transition to a better network, we're going to have to move everything over to IP eventually. It's going to take a long period of time. And what we've seen, certainly over the last 6 months or more, is a relatively dramatic set of, sort of events, or at least events that signal that something else is going to happen. It is not just the United States. The CRTC in Ottawa is doing exactly the same thing, going through exactly the same process. And they have actually issued orders that basically say we want to turn off POTS and move to all IP networks, and in fact mandate all IP interconnection, which essentially mandates the end of TDM and SS7 among the Canadian carriers at the same time. Now, they're struggling with what it might take and how it might do and under what authority to act is going on here. But central to all this, by the way, is numbering. So there's lots of meetings going on from back and forth, but the real trigger recently was not toll-free, but really Vonage. Vonage petitioned for direct access to the North American numbering plan and started a little firestorm in telco land, which is they got very, very angry because XO and Level 3 and increasingly CenturyLink and the wholesale divisions of the major carriers don't particularly like that idea. And so they bombarded the FCC with petitions to essentially deny Vonage the right to direct access to the North American numbering plan without a further notice of rulemaking about the entire numbering issue. And this, by the way, I filed about, basically say, well, look, what we all know at this particular point is if we are going to do a transition, you have to look at everything. And it's not just a question of Vonage having access to the NAMP. It's what happens to the toll-free system. It's what happens to short codes. It is what happens to the short message service, because that is an SS7 service, and that has to be transitioned at the same time. And slowly but deliberately, it is beginning to dawn on both the regulators and the rest of the industry that there is a very large issue that is going to have to be addressed. And I like to use the analogy, they're laying tarmac because, they've got a big old A380 that they want to launch, and they are going to launch it. And I am reasonably convinced that the FCC will institute a full formal rule proceeding on everything that is associated with numbering, including the organization and structure of the NAMP, who gets phone numbers, my personal favorite issue, which is national 10-digit dialing, because we now know from the intercarrier compensation and USF reform that they're already saying we're going to bill and keep in 8 years no matter what. And if you go to bill and keep, you're ending LATAs, and that means, wow, if you don't need LATAs, you don't need, NXXs. You don't, the structure of the North American numbering plan no longer requires the geographic nature of the phone number itself. It's essentially a name. So I will take solid multi-dollar bets from whoever that the FCC will, in fact, do something like that, maybe before January. Certainly not before November. We know that. But that they are laying groundwork and creating a public record, which is essentially what regulators do, saying that, yes, we have got to look at this because numbering is part of the transition as much as anything else, which means what happens to the databases? And that's really, the FCC Technical Advisory Committee has two subgroups, one looking at the database issues and the other looking at the actual names, the identifiers, the phone numbers themselves, and that is going to be an ongoing process. They will have a final report in the December 2012 timeframe, and probably you would see significant rulemaking in the 2013 timeframe, irrespective of who wins the election. And what is unusual about the transition issue, this is a Republican-led idea. It is Commissioner Pye, Commissioner McDowell. I believe the chairman is considerably supportive of the idea, but it will not make any difference who wins the election. This train is leaving the station, and they are going to do something for any number of perfectly rational and reasonable public policy issues. So the interesting part from the toll-free industry, and Bob Schaefer and I, people ask, well, what about ENOM? Oh God, it comes back. The question of the databases is going to be central to this, and there is no consensus about how this is going to ultimately look. But from a long-term perspective, SMS 800 Inc. and other folks in the toll-free industry are going to have to start thinking very carefully about what the transition looks like for the toll-free industry, because, again, if something happens here, and I believe something will happen, that the structure of the 800 SMS system will have to be radically redesigned. It may be an ENOM-like system. It may be something else. Who knows? But the idea of 800 number, sure, that's not going to change at all. It's a perfectly wonderful service. Billions and billions of dollars of call centers and industry are linked inexorably to the 800 system. So they're not going away. It's not going to happen. It's a perfectly wonderful service. It's great namespace. Again, every business, I use 800 numbers every single solitary day. So it's a question of, from the consumer's perspective and from industry's perspective, nothing really actually changed except you get a better, faster, cheaper service. Cheaper in the sense that it's lower cost to actually implement. You might actually be able to send a text to an 800 number. You might actually be able to have a video call to an 800 number call center. You can do all these things, but it has to transition. Time division multiplexing is dead, finished, over. It is not going to be upgraded, and it has to transition over time, if not for public safety reasons. And this is going to be very traumatic for the state regulators. I understand exactly where they're coming from. I have some friends down at the National Association for State Regulators, NARUC, and Brad Ramsey's an old friend of mine, and he goes, "You're not going to do this to me, are you, buddy?" And I go, "Sorry, it's like just it happens. It's going to happen at some particular point in time." But the federal-state partnership on how this transition is going to be executed makes a great deal of sense. And AT&T is legitimately worried about this. They want to do the transition for perfectly legitimate business as well as, other policy reasons at the same time. People are maneuvering about this. Verizon has some different views about this. CenturyLink, I think, is still probably thinking about it. But the fact that something is going to happen is pretty well, I think, baked into the process at this particular point in time. How long is this going to take? Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Robert.
Yeah.
I want to go back a couple of clicks and ask a question.
Sure.
You mentioned 10-digit dialing.
Yeah.
Do you have any information on what the public impact would be in terms of scope of people that have not converted to 10-digit dialing? I happen to live now in the land of 7-digit dialing, and I can tell you that, having been here a short period of time, that they are totally and completely unaware and unprepared for what you've just described.
Well, 70% of all telephone dialing right now is using 10-digit. When you look at overlays, and you know this as well as I do from your wonderful experience at Verizon, 10-digit dialing is about 70% plus of all dialing. I mean, 100% of mobile calls are done via 10 digits. Given the proliferation of overlays in the exhaust areas of the NAMP, we're already there. A lot of people are unprepared, but you as well as I do remember what may have happened in New York. I mean, they had to go to an overlay in New York City, and people thought there was going to be rioting in the streets. But guess what? It was like a non-event. All of Washington. Every city. All of California, all of Texas, all of Virginia is all national 10-digit dialing. People are going to be upset. But I'm sorry, tough. It's just this is one of the consequences of what a transition will look like. But more importantly, from the consumer and business perspective, this finally means one number essentially for life. We do with number portability what should have been done in the beginning, which was if you get a phone number, you can take it anywhere in the United States for any reason, for any service that can support it, and you're done. And that's really from a pure business perspective and a consumer perspective, because we are slowly but deliberately recovering. And pre-2008, about 7% of the entire American population had to move, and they ported their numbers. So this actually is a plus for the business community. Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question? This is Rebecca in Washington, and two notes. One, I'm fairly brutal about it because, of course, I work in the industry, so 10-digit dialing doesn't bother me. But and I'm in Washington State. All of Washington State, Idaho, Montana, multiple western states are still fully 7-digit dialing.
Yeah, it's the rural areas that are the problem.
Statewide for many states across the nation, 30% of the people in this nation. The second thing is many of the geographic numbers being used are for machine-to-machine. Can you give an update on where? I do know that the 500 numbers can be used for that.
That's OnStar, yeah.
So where this fits into this whole dialogue?
Well, where machine-to-machine fits in, I don't have any considerable knowledge of, though I know staff at the FCC is concerned about it. Namely, can we consider a different, remember, if you go to national 10-digit dialing, you solve a lot of problems with the NAMP because you get the D-digit back. And you get the D-digit back, you increase the size of the entire NAMP by 20% or so. So this, unfortunately, is going to look like a urban versus rural issue, but it's part of a transition, and we all sort of deal with it right now. And it's I like I said, my friends at Naruk are going to scream, but it is a freight train that is going to slowly but deliberately come down. And actually, doing the national 10-digit dialing is almost essential to doing the conversion itself. It just makes the network operation infinitely more easier on multiple levels. And I know people are going to be upset, but I think it's a very overblown issue, except where some places, maybe in Norman, Oklahoma, where they are going to be upset. But the truth of the matter is, it's one of those things that needs to get done.
Rich, will you define the D digit for those that might not know?
Yeah, the North American numbering plan is defined as NPA-NXX, the 4-digit string one way or the other. The NXX is the issue. The N in NXX can never be 1 or 0 because obviously if it's a 1 or a 0, it would signal the switch that something else is going on here one way or the other. So it's the 3-digit NPA is the area code, then the CO code NXX. So the N in NXX can never be 1 or 0, but in certain jurisdictions, being able to open up the D digit, especially Georgia, they're still having problems in California, all over the place, New York, a couple of other jurisdictions. Texas, it's still sort of a problem. I don't track that side of the numbering at all any longer. But yeah, it would relieve the problem in many respects. And
Rich,
it's well understood. Yeah.
One other question. I participated in the North American Numbering Council meeting, I think it was last week, and I thought I heard during that session that there are parts of California that actually require 11 digits, where you've got to dial the 1 code as well. Does anybody know if that's the case?
It could be. That's just the larger issue, though. The larger issue is there is a transition going on, and it is a transition that will make, quote unquote, the phone system, the PSTN. I mean, I call it the public SIP network right now because that's what it's going to end up looking like. I mean, it's going to be basically interconnection between service providers under some regime yet to be described. Because it ain't going to be Title II, I can guarantee you that, and I mean, the commission is pretty adamant. They're not going to try and regulate this thing under Title II. You have this quasi Title I information service, but the commission in this is very concerned about its authority to act here. Which, oddly enough, if you read my paper, I said, look, you actually have something else here. Your authority to act and the authority for the states to act lies under 251E1, which is actually control of the numbering plan. If the states and the commission could agree on a framework that says, if you want to get phone numbers, you must do foo. And that's how they would essentially assert some authority over a transition and the plan, if they chose to go down that right. It has some advantages to them. Because going down 251C or 252, that's just a rat hole. And no one in Washington believes for an instant that there's going to be a revision of the 96 Act anytime soon. So it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Richard Warren, just a real quick point of reference question. It's the last week of Q3, and in the last week of Q1 and Q2, there was a public TAC meeting, and I haven't seen anything about one. Do you know anything about when it's scheduled? Yeah.
Well, it was actually Friday. I was down there. It's you can if you go www.fcc/live, you can see the recording.
Oh, okay. So I was looking for it this week because it's been the last week of the month.
No, they changed it because of they changed it because of the Jewish holidays.
Okay. Oh, okay. So I can see
Right.
it. Okay. All right. Thanks.
And
Rich,
the next one is scheduled for December the 12th.
Okay.
Rich,
Great.
this is Jay. You said that basically the toll-free numbering is going to be with us forever,
Yeah.
and I think certainly my hope is that is the case. However, I have some concerns about a couple things in that regard. Number one is, could toll-free numbering be set up on a provider basis? Because right now, the toll-free telephone numbering administration is closer to an end user opt-in or an end user subscriber model than a carrier model. You can have multiple carriers associated with a given toll-free telephone number. And, I think provisioning a geographic number at the carrier provider level for all IP functionality works because you've only got one carrier associated with one number. But that doesn't hold with toll-free telephone numbers, and in many cases you've got responsible organizations that is the only definitive point associated with a toll-free telephone number. Many of those responsible organizations are not carriers.
Well,
so
there's no problem here.
Okay.
Well, that's not my point. This is what, frankly, I think I'm going to probably have to send a note to the FCC myself about this, which is, there's a restructure of the SMS 800 system, and I think the FCC should ask some pointed questions about this, which is if the corporate structure of SMS 800 and the system is going to be moving to something else, presumably it needs to be a little bit more open and transparent, number one. Two, it is since the system is in fact managing a national public resource, they are still phone numbers. The commission itself, along with on this matter, has absolute, unquestionable plenary authority. And that plenary authority over the numbering plan was successfully tested in the United States Appeals Court over the pooling issue. So what makes the regulators happy, state as well as local, is authority over the numbering plan cannot be questioned in that sense because it's been upheld in the courts. If you're a lawyer, it's called the Chevron deference here. That it was clear in the act that the commission in the states would have authority over the numbering plan. Therefore, they can basically do what they want to do. But logically, the way regulators operate is that they consult with the industry and goes, well, we think you need to go here, and what is your plan? And right now, what I'm suggesting is, somebody needs to come up with a plan.
Unquestionably, the FCC has authority. Well, let me step back on that. The FCC and the CRTC, I'm not sure how that shakes out with toll-free telephone numbers in North America because you've got a division of, two regulatory bodies. Over the resource. It's impossible to tell if a toll-free telephone number is either, strictly in the United States or in Canada. So that's one thing. But let's assume that the FCC has, authority over toll-free telephone numbers. That's only one part of the issue because the subscriber is not at the system-wide level. There is no definitive subscriber for a toll-free telephone number. The only thing you can really hang your hat on is that there's a one and only one responsible organization, and that issue, which has been a key issue in the enum space, as enum was originally envisioned as an end-user opt-in enum with a definitive subscriber, I think my concern is that as we get into this transition and as the volume in the conversation goes up on how our toll-free telephone number is going to transition over, the same old issue of who is the rightful definitive end-user subscriber for the toll-free telephone number is going to come up and be not only a policy stumbling block, but also a technological stumbling block to get back.
Truthfully, I don't see whether there's a technological problem here. I mean, basically, from a classic enum perspective, all I need to do is, resolve the number in some way, shape, or form that will give me a URI or a series of URIs to a point of interconnection or whatever. It doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't. In the classical sense, it's basically a URI to a session border control at the edge of the network. I understand that.
Well, let's just take it on the tech.
I mean, let me go for a little bit further with this.
Sorry.
What is important, and what I will privately argue, by the way, or publicly argue, I would say to the commission itself, is it really doesn't make any difference. You need a plan. Somebody needs to start planning this, because it may well take years to resolve some of these issues to a certain extent, but no one is planning this thing right now. And it is ultimately going to be a technical issue at some particular point in time, but defining who is the ultimate responsible organization for a phone number is something that can be worked out. Resolving phone numbers to some identifier that ultimately gets you where it gets the session established in some way, shape, or form, it works. Enum works. I mean, it is not E164 ARPA, but it's deployed all over the place. It works all the time. What no one understands is that the classic enum technology is deployed all over the place. The Federal Communications Commission's TRS service for the hearing impaired is an enum database operated under contract by Newstar for the Federal Communications Commission. And every SMS message, by the way, namely when you take a picture from your phone and want to send it to another person, every single solitary one of those pictures dips an enum database to find the mobile message center of the terminating carrier of record for that email. That's all enum at this particular point. We know how this stuff works. It does work. And Verizon, for instance, everybody is doing IP interconnection right now in a happenstance methodologies all over the place. Cable operators do it every day. Verizon does it every day. This is nothing new, but what is happening is what we need to stop is using time division multiplexing as the default network, because that
Rich,
is
I think one of the big areas of gap that's going to be in that particular area, and you're right, there's a lot of deployments, is small rural carriers that have TDM networks and very little resource to change them. So I think,
Bob, yeah, you're absolutely right.
So there's a lot of little corners of the world that are going to have to change their interconnection arrangements and understand what's happening.
Well, Bob, you're absolutely right, and I've seen some of the paperwork from Big Bend Telecom in West Texas, and they are apoplectic now, and the rural carrier. I really feel terrible for the rural carriers because on the one hand, you had the USF ICC reform, which is essentially yanking intercarrier compensation out of the picture by going to bill and keep. Then the USF reform, which goes from the existing system to Connect America, is using this incredibly complex mathematical formula called, quatrial regression analysis that only a rocket science or a particle physicist can properly understand. And the rural carriers are flying into Washington on a weekly basis, going up to the Hill, They're going over the Office of Science and Technology. They're going to the FCC. They are apoplectic. And then last but not least, you have this situation where, we want to turn off TDM while you're at it. And how this is, you are absolutely right. How in the world this is going to get funded? What is, in fact, a technically feasible point of interconnection for these guys? Oh, yeah, I can see this one. I mean, I've already heard the story, which is, well, if you want to connect VoIP to Verizon, you've got to do it at, 46 Dearborn in Chicago, but, you're a carrier in Louisiana? I mean, now we're back to the special access circuit problem. I mean, it is not pretty, but the consequences of doing nothing are even worse because it's going to be one of those Class 5 switches blows a backplane when the mother's trying to get 911 for a small child, and when somebody starts dying, Congress is going to get themselves involved. And
yeah, it has to happen, and there are, like you say, the planning is the key.
You got to have a plan. We need a plan, and that's that is my argument to commission and staff is from a purely policy perspective, you're making the correct decisions. I mean, the intercarrier compensation and universal service reform was absolutely necessary. The arbitrage in the system was unsustainable. But the way they went about it was sort of a mess. I mean, I'll admit that. I don't know any telecom consultant that can figure out this quadrature regression analysis business. And it's a nightmare for the rural carriers. But the thing is, the equipment is actually out there to do some of this stuff. I mean, Genband's got some great products out there. So does, we know how to do this. And if it does take, some additional federal capital funding here one way or the other, there is sort of this plan for Connect America Fund that actually might, provide some, useful ongoing funding. And I think that there is bipartisan support for doing that. Certainly among the Republicans in rural areas, they're going to go along with this.
Rich, there was a little I'm sorry, there was a little blurb, I think, from the Addis Weekly newsletter. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but there was an indication that the plans for funding the Connect America or Universal Broadband Fund might shift to a telephone number-centric funding method. Do you have any comments, any observations on that?
Well, it's just idiotic, utterly idiotic. They're looking at connections, they're looking at the phone number issue, but if you tax phone numbers, you're just creating arbitrage. It's just another form of arbitrage. I've argued to people privately that the way to do this is just a 2.5% excise tax on the whole communications industry in the United States, and it would be simple. It would be simple to collect, not simple to administer, but simple to collect. And, the commission is weighing that issue right and left, and I hope they don't make a mistake. I really do. But I mean, there's a lot of objections to using phone numbers as a taxing method because it's just wrong. If you want to fund broadband for all Americans, for goodness sake, then just tax broadband for all Americans. That's the way to do it. I mean, it's simpler. That's why intercarrier compensation is such a disaster. It costs more to collect it and bill for it than it does for actually delivering the service. It's arbitrage within the system that's just daylight madness.
Well, I concur with many of your points, Rich, and there are some that I have a different view about. But why don't we open it up? Any questions? Any comments? Any points of clarification? Any acronyms that we've used on the call today that anybody would like clarification around, or any other opinions, any other views?
I may have to get off the phone fairly quickly at 5. But I did the two things that I would emphasize are it is only accelerated since the last time, I did one of these things for you, Jay. I mean, there is nothing stopping this freight train. It is going to be very, when you've got a big freight train that's got, 65 coal cars behind it, it takes a while to get ahead of steam. But the train is slowly moving out of the station. This is going to take a long time. It is not going to go away. It has absolute bipartisan support. It is vital that the state regulators get involved in this as soon as practically possible. And I'm very sympathetic to the state regulators. It's complicated issues. And what I hate is for some of these discussions going on in Addis, and it's pay to play, they're behind closed doors, and whether you're with the state of Washington, state of Oregon, state of Virginia, you can't see what's going on. And that's wrong. I mean, what we need in this transition, and I argued this in my paper, and I will argue this before any state commission, which is what you need is you need an open, transparent, consensus-driven process by which all the various stakeholders at least can understand what's going on, because it is complicated. But it is the national communication system in the United States, and it's just like we can't go on at the way it's going at this particular point in time.
Yeah, I concur, and I think your point about, hey, there's got to be a plan, or there's got to be some sort of model, or there's got to be something for people to start to build upon, and what is it? How long is it going to take for some sort of consensus to build around that, and what's the model? I also agree that transparency is key, because a big part of, certainly the internet is built. Trust is a key component, and granted, trust is lacking in many respects, but there's the transparency, the trust, some level of confidence has to be there. So,
and the other thing is, look, from a national perspective, we've actually done this stuff before. The telephone system, as we know it, has probably gone through 3 major revolutions. We had the classic, operator-based, sort of manual switching, and then we went to digital switching in the early 70s. Telecom is really very good about understanding a large technical transition. More importantly, not that long ago, we went through a major technical transition in television. The digital television transition was a big deal. But guess what? It worked. We all now, we can all watch, Sooner football on really big TVs now. And we freed up spectrum for innovative wireless services. The federal government got, $32 billion in change for the Treasury, which they waste, of course. But that's beside the point. The plan worked.
The other transition too that I think you were thinking about was from analog cellular to digital cellular.
Absolutely, very good point. We know how to do that. We know how to do these very large-scale technical transitions, but what you have to have first is a plan. And my strong recommendation to the 800 industry in general is, you cannot delay at least thinking about what the end game ultimately looks like here, because it will take a great deal of time to ultimately be able to do, and what are the appropriate roles and responsibilities, because somebody on 12th Street in Washington is going to throw out a further notice of proposed rulemaking, and they're going to go, we are seeking comment on how the 800 number system should transition to all IP networks. That I can almost guarantee you is going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and we've also got announcements by AT&T and Verizon that they're going to be introducing some sort of toll-free data service. Now, how that shakes out.
Who knows? But I'll tell you what, the other driver, by the way, the driver that is going to throw all this into the spotlight is we know that AT&T and Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile are building their LTE networks right now. And though we have not seen any announcements on how they're going to do voice over LTE, that's going to be a big trigger because that triggers the interconnection problem. Because voice over LTE means G722 AMR wideband. It means that a mobile call will sound as good as Skype. It will.
Or better.
Better, yeah. And by the way, my friends at British Telecom and France Telecom and the Europeans that have experimented with this, they swear by it now. They did a big deal in Croatia, big deal in one way. They're saying that customer satisfaction is higher, average revenue per user is higher, lower network maintenance costs, one way or other. It's good to go. So, 2000. I do not know, by the way, if the iPhone 5 can do it or not. Whether or not the actual new hardware in the iPhone 5 will be ready for voice over LTE. I know Apple has hired the people to do the firmware or evaluate the firmware. Whether or not it's going to be a software upgrade to the 4S or 5, or they're going to delay it until 6, I don't know. But I'm not selling my Apple shares yet.
Yeah, I would keep an eye on that. But anyway. The other key
the VoLTE transition, it forces the interconnection issue because AT&T and Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile will want to interconnect their VoLTE networks, and they are going to need some kind of an identifier in some database someplace that actually says, yes, this is VoLTE. More importantly, because you would no longer use the TDM network as a default, finally, the enterprises, Caterpillar, IBM, General Electric, that have spent billions of dollars on SIP-based voice-over IP systems can finally get the full advantage of it because they won't dumb down the voice to G711 any longer. Yeah. That alone is worth some of the transition price here, one way or the other. We always consider consumers, but it's the business-to-business that is equally important, and from a purely revenue perspective, is of equal, if not greater, value to the service providers.
Yeah, I mean, what we're bringing up here in this last part of the call is that there are so many different dimensions where pressure's building for a sea change to happen. We are in the middle of some what I would call, sea change, tectonic, whatever you want to call it, revolutions, evolutions that I don't think any of us can really predict, but the explosion of so many factors, mobile, cloud, etc., over the top, it's an amazing time. But to kind of circle back to one other transition that occurred that I think is a key transition, in the realm of radio spectrum, there was a transition from a commons-based allocation model to a market-based allocation model. So that is another, in my view, a paving factor that was successfully navigated, and I think there's some elements within the numbering resource where there's some lessons that can be learned and used from the transition from commons radio spectrum into market-based allocation. So I'm going to wrap it up at this point. Rich, I very much appreciate you participating again. I appreciate everyone that's been on the call, that's commented and contributed. Next month, we will have Mr. Tom Fitzgerald, who is the president and CEO of SMS 800 Inc., will be joining us along with some of his key members of his team, his CTO and someone else at least. And we will be talking about, what are the plans for the toll-free telephone number database and administration, and what might the future hold. So you can go ahead and mark it for 4 p.m. on October the 31st, and same dial-in information. And this is recorded, by the way, and I posted some of the prior recordings on phoneword.com in the Phoneword forum section. So if you're interested, you can go back and listen. And hopefully soon we will have a way to listen to these on YouTube as well. So, any other comments?
I'm gonna run, Jay.
All right, thanks, Rich. Any other comments or questions?
Hey, Bob Schaefer, you owe me a call one of these days, brother.
Okay, nice to talk with you, sir.
You bet.
All right.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.